The Detroit summer night bled neon onto the wet asphalt, a fine drizzle. More mist than rain hung in the air, blurring the edges of the riverfront market into a watercolor of sizzling food stalls and hurried figures under glowing awnings. The air was thick with the smells of grilled meat, damp concrete, and the ever-present metallic tang of the river. I clutched the strap of my canvas tote bag, the corner of my sketchbook digging into my ribs. Inside, nestled between charcoal sketches of hands and faces, was the reason for the frantic, jackhammer rhythm of my heart, a small USB drive, crudely wrapped in black duct tape. My shift at the bar had ended an hour ago, but the exhaustion was a distant hum beneath a sharper, more immediate terror. They had been waiting, 2 of them. I'd spotted their reflections in the glass of a closed bakery, hulking silhouettes that didn't belong among the late-night diners and market vendors. On the thick column of each man's neck was the same tattoo I had inked just last week, a clock face with hands spinning backward, frozen at 11:11. The Halcyon clock, a symbol I now knew was a brand, a marker for the kind of men who moved illicit cargo across the dark waters of the Great Lakes and washed their profits through digital ether. My boots slapped against the pavement, the sound too loud in my own ears. I didn't run. Not yet. Running was an admission. Running was a signal. I walked, fast and deliberate, weaving through the thinning crowd, my gaze darting left and right, searching for the familiar landmarks I had mapped in my head for just this kind of emergency. A faded mural of a phoenix, a rusted fire hydrant. There, a brick wall slick with rain, marking the mouth of an alley. My hand, slick with sweat, fumbled in my pocket for the can of spray paint. It was a habit I'd picked up, leaving little marks, modern breadcrumbs for a girl who knew her city's forgotten pathways better than its main streets. With a quick, practiced motion, I drew a sharp yellow streak on the brick, a private signpost. Then I plunged into the darkness between the buildings. The alley was a narrow throat of shadow and stench, squeezed between the market and the derelict skeleton of an old warehouse. The sounds of the city muffled instantly, replaced by the drip of water from a broken gutter and the frantic pounding in my chest. Their footsteps followed, heavier and more confident than mine. They weren't trying to be quiet. They were hunting. Panic clawed at my lungs. I pushed myself faster, my bag banging against my hip. A glint of metal arced through the dim light ahead of me. I heard the sharp, rattling hiss of a chain hitting the ground just as my foot caught on it. The world tilted violently. My hands shot out, but they met only air before my body slammed into the unforgiving ground. A raw, searing pain exploded in my knee. Grime and gravel bit into my palms. My bag flew from my grasp, its contents spilling onto the wet concrete. And there it was, lying obscenely in a puddle of grimy rainwater, reflecting the distant neon glow, the duct-taped USB drive. Nowhere left to run. Little artist, one of them rasped, his voice a low growl. He was closing in, the chain dangling from his fist like a captured snake. I scrambled backward, crab-walking through the filth, my eyes locked on the drive, my sketches, my work. My life was in that bag, but the drive, that was my death sentence. It held everything they wanted, everything I had been foolish enough to get tangled in. Just as the first man reached down, a shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness at the far end of the alley. It wasn't a sudden movement, but a slow, deliberate separation, as if the night itself had decided to take human form. He was tall, dressed in a tailored dark coat that seemed to absorb what little light there was. He didn't rush forward or shout. He simply stood there, a figure of absolute stillness in a world that had just been spinning with violence and fear. The 2 men froze. It was instantaneous. One moment they were predators, leaning over their cornered prey. The next they were statues, their eyes fixed on the man in the shadows. He took a single step forward, into a sliver of light from the street. His face was sharp angles and quiet intensity, his dark hair slicked back from the rain. He looked to be in his mid-30s, and his eyes, even from 20 feet away, were like chips of steel. He wasn't armed, not in any way I could see. He simply lifted a hand and adjusted the fit of a black leather glove, a small, precise movement that carried an impossible weight of authority. "This is my territory," he said. His voice was low, calm, and utterly devoid of emotion. It wasn't a threat, it was a statement of fact, as indisputable as gravity. The man with the chain took a half step back, a flicker of something recognition, or maybe pure, primal fear in his eyes. His partner glanced at him, then back at the newcomer. The air crackled with a tension so thick I felt I could choke on it. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, the first goon spat on the ground near my feet. "She owes for the goods," he snarled, but the bravado was gone, replaced by a sullen compliance. He pulled his partner back, and together, they retreated, melting back into the mouth of the alley and disappearing into the market night. The silence they left behind was deafening. My breath came in ragged, shuddering gasps. My knee throbbed, a hot, wet stickiness soaking through the denim of my jeans. Trembling, I reached out and snatched the USB drive, my fingers closing around its familiar, taped shell. My territory. The words echoed in my head. What did that even mean? This strip of forgotten pavement behind a condemned building. The man took another step closer. He pulled a folded white handkerchief from his coat pocket and held it out to me. "Blood attracts scavengers," he said, his voice just as flat and controlled as before. I flinched, pushing myself up to a sitting position, my back pressed against the cold, damp brick of the warehouse. I ignored his hand. "I don't need saving." The words were sharp, a reflexive defense mechanism from a lifetime of needing no one but myself. A ghost of a smile, so faint it might have been a trick of the light, touched his lips. "You need time," he corrected me, his voice unwavering. "I just bought you 3 minutes." As if on cue, the distant, mournful wail of a patrol car siren cut through the night, growing steadily closer. My head snapped toward the sound. Cops. Another complication I couldn't afford? "They'll be sweeping the area," the man stated calmly. "I can give you a ride." "No, thank you," I shot back, my mind racing. I didn't know him, didn't know what he wanted. In the city, saviors were often just a different kind of monster. I started to gather my spilled sketchbook and pencils, my movements clumsy with adrenaline. "As you wish." He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, but when I looked toward the alley entrance, my escape route, another figure was standing there, shorter, broader, but just as still and silent as the man in front of me. A sentinel. He had blocked my only way out. My choice had been an illusion. It was either trust the devil I didn't know or wait for the halcyon clock to circle back. Defeated. I let out a shaky breath and stood, putting my weight on my good leg. I gave a stiff, resentful nod. He turned without another word and led the way out of the alley. The black coupe parked at the curb was sleek and predatory, its finish so polished it reflected the bleeding neon signs like liquid night. He opened the passenger door for me, a gesture of old-world courtesy that felt deeply unsettling in the context of what had just happened. I slid into the leather seat, the interior smelling of clean, expensive materials and the faint, cool scent of spearmint tobacco. It was the smell of a world utterly alien to my own. He drove with an unnerving economy of motion, his hands steady on the wheel as we moved through the rain-slicked streets of Detroit. He didn't ask my name. He didn't ask about the USB drive clutched in my fist. He didn't ask why 2 men were chasing me down a dark alley. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers. When I gave him the address to my apartment complex in Ferry Row, he simply nodded and made the turn. He pulled up in front of the aging brick building that I called home. Before I could scramble out of the car and back into the relative safety of my own life, he spoke. "The paint," he said, his gaze directed not at me, but at a wall across the street where, earlier in the week, I had left a similar yellow mark. Good sign, but never use the same escape route twice. A cold chill snaked down my spine. He had noticed. He had understood. This was not a man who missed details. I fumbled with the door handle, mumbling a thank you that felt like ash in my mouth, and practically fell out of the car. I didn't look back as I limped through the lobby and up the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment, the key shaking in my hand as I unlocked the door. Inside, I leaned back against the door, the chain of 3 deadbolts a flimsy comfort. The small apartment was quiet, filled with the familiar clutter of my life canvases leaning against the wall, the scent of turpentine and old paper. My eyes fell on the small, framed photograph on my bookshelf. It was of my mother, taken years ago, her hands, strong and capable, resting on a sewing machine. She was a seamstress, a woman who built a life for us stitch by stitch, who taught me the value of hard work and the danger of attracting the wrong kind of attention. Her mantra had been simple: keep your head down, do good work, and cause no trouble. I stared at her smiling face, a fresh wave of shame washing over me. No more trouble. I whispered to the empty room, my own promise a fragile shield against the night. But as I looked down at the blood blooming through the fabric of my jeans and the duct tape drive in my hand, I knew it was a promise I could no longer keep. The trouble was already here, and it had a name I didn't yet know, a face of cold control, and the keys to a black coupe that smelled of spearmint. The morning after felt like a bad hangover, but my only indulgence had been terror. The docklight was my sanctuary, a dive bar smelling of stale beer, sawdust, and the weary sweat of the men who worked the port. I moved behind the bar with an autopilot efficiency honed by years of late-night shifts, pouring drafts for longshoremen and sliding whiskeys down to truckers whose faces were illuminated by the glow of the corner TV. But my mind wasn't on the job. Beneath the counter, hidden from view, my sketchbook lay open. My hand, steady despite the tremor deep in my bones, moved a charcoal pencil across the page. I wasn't drawing faces today. I was drawing a map from memory, connecting the dots of late-night drop-offs and hushed meetings I'd overheard, reconstructing the nervous system of the halcyon clock's territory. My phone buzzed on the shelf next to the register. A text from Juno. You seeing this news feeds blowing up about a freighter fire off Red Brace Pier? My blood ran cold. Red Brace Pier, the place where I'd done the off-the-books tattoo job last week, the one that had started this whole mess. I quickly typed back, how bad? Total loss. They're saying faulty wiring, but the chatter online is different. I knew what different meant. It meant an accident that wasn't an accident. It meant loose ends being cauterized. The bell above the door chimed, announcing a new customer. I shoved my phone into my back pocket without looking up, schooling my features into a mask of bored neutrality. What can I get for you? Black coffee? I froze. That voice. It was the same low, controlled timbre from the alley, a voice that carried no warmth but demanded absolute attention. I looked up slowly. It was him. Cassian Vale. In the harsh daylight of the bar, he looked less like a shadow and more like a predator resting between hunts. He was wearing a simple gray Henley that did nothing to hide the lean, hard muscle of his shoulders and chest, his dark hair perfectly styled. He looked utterly out of place amongst the grime and faded glory of the docklight, yet he wore the space as comfortably as he wore his expensive watch. He slid onto a bar stool, his movements fluid and precise, and his steel gray eyes met mine. There was no recognition in them, no acknowledgement of the rain-soaked drama of the previous night. My hands felt clumsy as I turned to the coffee machine. I could feel his gaze on my back, a physical pressure. As I set the heavy ceramic mug down on the bar, he pushed something across the polished wood toward me. Not the USB drive that was still safely tucked away in my apartment, but a small, folded piece of paper. Yours, I believe, he said quietly. I unfolded it. It was a printout of the lock screen for the drive's contents, a complex digital artwork I had designed myself. Scrawled across the top in neat, block letters was a single word, Ilara, my mother's name. A cold dread, sharper than anything I'd felt in the alley, washed over me. The password is an anagram of your mother's name, he stated, his voice a low murmur only I could hear. It's a common encryption method for sentimentalists. Predictable. He hadn't found the drive. He had simply broken into it from afar. He knew my mother's name. He knew how my mind worked. The implication was a punch to the gut. He hadn't just saved me. He had been investigating me. Before I could form a response, the bell chimed again. This time, the man who entered was the polar opposite of Cassian. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore a rumpled trench coat that screamed cop as loudly as a siren. He scanned the room, his eyes sharp and assessing, before they landed on me. He strode over to the bar, flashing a wallet that held a gold badge. "Lena Mirek," he asked, his voice a gravelly baritone. "Agent Victor Lark, Midwest Port Authority Crimes Unit. I need to ask you a few questions about a private tattoo meetup near Red Brace Pier last week." My world shrank to the space between these two men. On one side, a silent, all-knowing criminal. On the other, the law. I was trapped. I opened my mouth to speak, to lie, to say anything, but Cassian spoke first. He didn't even look at Lark. He just took a slow sip of his coffee. "Agent," he said, his tone respectfully neutral. "Shouldn't you be directing your questions to the establishment's owner? It's poor form to harass the staff." Lark's gaze shifted to Cassian. It was a long, heavy look. The air thickened with an unspoken challenge, a clash of two different kinds of apex predators recognizing each other across the urban jungle. Lark was a lion, powerful and backed by the authority of the pride, but Cassian was a wolf, leaner, quieter, and belonging to a pack that operated by a different, older set of rules. I saw the flicker of understanding in Lark's eyes. He wasn't just talking to a concerned customer. He knew he was in the presence of an off-the-books monarch. Lark gave a tight, humorless smile. He pulled a business card from his coat and placed it on the bar, well away from Cassian's coffee. "You're right," he said. His eyes still locked on Cassian, but his words directed at me. "My apologies. Miss Mirek, if you remember anything, or if you ever feel like your situation is unsafe, give me a call." He turned and walked out without a backward glance. The tension didn't dissipate with his departure. Cassian finished his coffee in silence, then placed a crisp $20 bill on the counter. As he stood to leave, he slid the bill toward me. Underneath it was his own number, handwritten on the back of the receipt. "When you decide you need direct answers instead of protection," he said softly, "call me." He walked out, leaving me standing in the sudden, ringing silence with two phone numbers and no good choices. That night, in the comforting chaos of Juno's apartment, surrounded by her audio equipment and the smell of ozone, we finally faced the beast, Juno, with her lightning-fast fingers and an intuitive understanding of code, plugged the drive into her rig. The artwork I'd designed loaded onto her multiple screens, a swirling digital abstract of blues and grays. "Okay, so on the surface, it's just a set of high-res art files," she murmured, her brow furrowed in concentration. "But the metadata, Lena, the metadata is insane. It's bloated, way too big for a simple JPEG." I watched as she peeled back the digital layers, and there it was, embedded within the strings of code that dictated pixel color and resolution, was a ghost ledger. It was a meticulously detailed shipping manifest disguised as art data. Routes, container numbers, cargo weights, and dates. It tracked a covert shipping line from Mackinac Island down to Thunder Bay, a shadowy artery pumping illicit goods through the heart of the Midwest. My breath hitched. I remembered him, the client. He'd been strange, obsessive about the details. He hadn't wanted a tattoo on his skin. He'd paid me, in a thick envelope of cash, to design a digital one for his NFT collection. A clock, its hands spinning backward to 11:11. The halcyon clock. The cash had paid for the last 2 months of my mother's hospice care, a small mercy in a sea of grief and debt. I had been so desperate, so grateful for the work, that I hadn't asked the right questions. I hadn't seen that I wasn't an artist being hired. I was a cog being fitted into a machine I couldn't comprehend. I wasn't just a witness. I was an accomplice, an unwitting architect of their brand. But this drive, This ledger I had unknowingly carried, it wasn't just my indictment. It was my only way out. I just had to give it to the right person. My phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. Cassian's number, 3rd Trestle Bridge, 1 a.m. We need to talk about what you owe. A current of fear and resolve shot through me. I went, tucked into the pocket of my jacket. My fingers were wrapped around the cold, plastic handle of a box cutter. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The old railroad bridge was a skeletal silhouette against the moonlit sky. Cassian was already there, leaning against a steel girder, alone. No car, no sentinels. The river flowed silently beneath us. "You're not armed," I stated, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. "I don't need to be," he replied, his gaze fixed on the dark water. "This isn't a threat, it's an education." He held up his phone. The screen illuminated a single photograph. It was a shipping container, the halcyon clock stenciled on its corrugated side. But the doors were open, and inside, huddled together in the dim light, were the terrified faces of men and women, their eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. "They're not just moving cargo, Lena," he said, his voice flat. "They're moving people, smuggling them into undocumented sweatshops. One of them is a garment factory called Needle Cove." Needle Cove. The words hit me like a physical blow. A factory. A seamstress. My mother's hands, calloused and pricked from years bent over a sewing machine. The memory was so vivid I could almost smell the hot iron and fabric. This wasn't just a crime. It was a desecration of everything she had worked for. "I'm taking this to the press," I choked out, horrified. "To Lark." Cassian finally looked at me, his expression unreadable. "The press will get a witness killed before the morning edition even prints. And Lark, he's a good cop in a compromised system. The leak that gets you identified will come from the inside, and he'll be powerless to stop it." He took a step closer, and for the first time, I saw something beyond cold control in his eyes. It was a flicker of something ancient, something weary. "I want to destroy them. Lena, the halcyon clock is a cancer, and their methods are imprecise. Bad for business, bad for this city." He paused. "But I can't do it without a map. That ledger on your drive is the only complete map that exists." He was offering me a deal, an unholy alliance. "You help me decode those routes. Help me understand their entire operation," he proposed, his voice a low, persuasive hum. "And I will give you my word. I will tear the halcyon clock down to its very foundations. I will make sure every single person in that photograph is freed." I stared at him, at this impossible man who spoke of dismantling criminal empires as if he were discussing a corporate takeover. He was a monster, I knew that, but he was pointing his monstrous power at the very people who had dragged me into the darkness. "I have one condition," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He waited. "No one gets shot in front of me." A slow, measured nod. "I prefer negotiations to bullets," Cassian Vale said. "They're far more effective." The address Cassian gave me wasn't for a sterile office or a lavish penthouse. He led me to a quiet, unassuming brick building in a forgotten industrial sector, its windows dark, a single brass plaque by the door that read Vale Horological Restoration, a watchmaker's shop. The air inside smelled of brass polish, old wood, and lubricating oil. It was a place frozen in time, the walls lined with glass cases displaying intricate clockworks and antique timepieces. But the rhythmic, synchronized ticking that filled the space wasn't just from the clocks. It was the sound of a heart beating, a quiet, orderly power humming just beneath the surface. He called it the orrery. It was his center of the universe. He led me past the showroom, through a door disguised as a grandfather clock, and into the true nerve center. It was a stark contrast, a modern, subterranean suite of rooms with servers humming softly and screens displaying silent, scrolling data. In the main chamber, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun looked up from a holographic map projected onto a large table. She wore a tailored suit that was probably worth more than my apartment. "Mireille, this is Lena Mirek," Cashin said by way of introduction. She is the artist. Mireille Gage's gaze was as sharp and analytical as a scalpel. She looked me over once, a quick, dismissive appraisal. Cassian, she said, her voice crisp and cool, her eyes never leaving his. Bringing a civilian into the orrery isn't a risk. It's a blind spot. She's not a civilian, Cassian countered smoothly, his tone leaving no room for argument. She's the key. Get her set up. Mireille's lips thinned, but she nodded curtly and led me to a workstation that made Juno's rig look like a child's toy. For the next several hours, I lost myself in my own creation. The world of ticking clocks and silent power faded away, and I was back in my element, a digital space of layers and code. I had built the artwork, and I knew its secrets. Cassian had been right about the metadata, but he'd only seen the front door. The true ledger was hidden deeper. I'd embedded it in the very fabric of the image itself, a form of digital steganography I'd once thought was clever. Now, it just felt reckless. Each brushstroke, each dot of digital paint was a breadcrumb. I worked with a focus born of fear and a desperate need to prove my worth. I isolated the color layers, running filters, searching for the anomalies I had hidden. Finally, I found it, a series of seemingly random blue pixels scattered across the artwork. On their own, they were nothing. But when I cross-referenced their placement against the timestamps in the metadata, a pattern emerged. They were coordinates, longitude and latitude. When I plotted them on a map, they formed a jagged line across the Great Lakes. It's not just a route, I murmured, leaning closer to the screen. It's timed. I pulled up another data set from the metadata records of tidal patterns and lake currents for the corresponding dates. They're moving the containers according to the tidal schedules, using the strongest currents to mask the ship's true speed and conserve fuel. It makes them almost invisible to standard shipping surveillance. Throughout it all, I could feel Cassian watching me. He didn't hover, but he was always there, a silent presence at the edge of the room, sometimes holding a cup of coffee, sometimes just observing. I caught him watching my hands as I worked, noticing the slight tremor that started whenever I typed the words Needle Cove. I saw his eyes linger on my mouth when I bit my lower lip in concentration. He wasn't just gathering intelligence on the Halcyon clock anymore. He was gathering it on me, filing away the small, involuntary tells that gave away my fear. Once, during a break while the system was running a complex decryption, he spoke, his voice pulling me from my trance. You're good at finding what's hidden. I had to be, I said without thinking. He was silent for a moment. Then he said, I was born in Rivergate. I survived. It was only 2 sentences, but they hung in the air with the weight of a multi-volume biography. Rivergate was one of the city's worst districts, a place people clawed their way out of or died trying. He had survived. It explained the steel in his eyes, the absolute control. He had willed himself into existence, and he would not allow that existence to be threatened. A strange sort of trust began to form between us in that quiet, ticking place. It wasn't built on promises or shared secrets, but on his unwavering respect for my autonomy. You can walk out that door at any time, Lena, he told me once. No one will stop you. This has to be your choice. Knowing I had the freedom to leave was the only thing that made me want to stay. Late one night, we were alone in the main server room, the hum of the machines a constant companion. A storm had rolled in off the lake, and the rain hammered against the roof far above us. The lights flickered once, twice, then died, plunging us into a half-darkness illuminated only by the emergency glow of the server racks. A deep, metallic groan echoed from somewhere in the building as the backup generators struggled to kick in. The sound was alien and unnerving, and on instinct, I flinched, my shoulder bumping against his. I started to pull away, but then I just stopped. I leaned my weight against him just for a second, a silent admission of fear. He didn't move a muscle. He didn't put his arm around me or offer empty words of comfort. He just stood there, solid and unyielding, a rock in the storm. letting me borrow his strength until the lights hummed back to life. The storm raged on. After I'd made another breakthrough, tracing the money flow from the sweatshop to a series of art auctions, a sense of weary triumph settled over me. We stood by one of the reinforced windows in a quieter room, looking up at a skylight where the rain hammered down in sheets. The only light came from a single, low-wattage lamp on a nearby table, casting everything in a soft, golden glow. "We should celebrate," I said, my voice quiet. "This isn't over yet," he replied, his voice a low rumble. "I know." He was standing behind me, so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body, slowly, as if testing the air. He placed his hands on my arms, just above the elbows. His touch was light, tentative. My breath caught in my throat. He slid his hands down to my waist, his thumbs resting gently on my hip bones, and leaned in, his chin brushing the top of my head. I could smell the faint scent of his cologne, clean and crisp, mingled with the smell of rain. He didn't say anything. He just held me, his solid presence a shield against the storm outside and the one raging inside me. After a long moment, he dipped his head, his lips near my ear. "Are you sure?" he whispered, his voice rough with an emotion I couldn't name. It was a question that held 100 others. "Are you sure you want this? Are you sure you trust me? Are you sure you know what you're getting into?" Slowly, I turned in his arms to face him. I raised my head, and my eyes met his. In their steel-gray depths, I didn't see a crime boss or a monster. I saw the boy from Rivergate who had survived. I saw a man who understood what it meant to be hunted. Without a word, I raised a hand and rested it on his chest, feeling the steady, powerful beat of his heart beneath my palm. That was all the answer he needed. He lowered his head and kissed me. It wasn't a kiss of passion or demand, but of discovery. It was slow, gentle at first, his lips brushing against mine as if memorizing their shape. Then it deepened. His hand moved from my waist to the small of my back, holding me firmly but not possessively, his other hand coming up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. A soft sigh escaped my lips, and I leaned into him, my body melting against his. My own hand slid from his chest up to his neck, my fingers tangling in the soft hair at his nape, pulling him closer. A low groan rumbled in his chest, and the kiss became more urgent, a silent conversation of fear and relief and a desperate, shared need for a single moment of peace. A loud clap of thunder rattled the building, and we both broke away, breathing heavily. A small smile touched my lips, and I saw an answering one on his. He leaned his forehead against mine, and we just stood there for a long time, our hearts hammering against our ribs in a frantic, perfect rhythm, the golden light reflecting the raindrops on the skylight like scattered diamonds. The next morning, one of his silent guards drove me home. Cassian wasn't there. There were no promises, no talk of the future. But sitting on the passenger seat of the car was a steaming paper cup of black coffee, exactly how I liked it. A small, simple gesture that felt more intimate than the kiss we had shared. Back in my apartment, the quiet warmth of the gesture evaporated. A plain manila envelope had been slid under my door. My name was not on it. My fingers trembled as I tore it open. Inside were photographs. The first was of me and Cassian, walking into the orrery, taken from a distance. Scrawled on the back in crude, block letters was a message. Return the drive. Thursday night. Ferry Row 6. Or your friend disappears. My blood turned to ice. My hand shook as I pulled out the second photo. It was Juno. She was walking into her apartment building, smiling at something on her phone, completely unaware that she was being watched, that she was now a target. A piece of leverage. Panic, cold and suffocating, crushed my chest. My first instinct was to call Cassian, to run back to the safety of his ticking fortress. But what could he do? This was my fault. I had dragged Juno into this. Involving Cassian further would only escalate things, put him in more danger. My mind latched onto the other option, the business card Agent Lark had given me. If you ever feel unsafe. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely dial the number. Lark, he answered, his voice gravelly. This is Lena Mirek. I stammered. I need help. I need to talk about witness protection. Stay where you are, he said, his voice instantly sharp with urgency. Where can we meet? Somewhere public, but quiet. The cafe at the Institute of Arts, I blurted out, naming the first place that came to mind. 1 hour, I'll be there, he promised. I hung up, a small measure of relief washing over me, but it was fleeting. I had made a fatal error. In my panic, I had forgotten one crucial detail. The phone I was using was the one Cassian had given me after my first one had been damaged, a sleek, encrypted burner phone. A phone that was part of his network. Miles away, in the heart of the orrery. My text message to Agent Lark flashed across the screen. It was instantly flagged, not for its content, but for the digital echo that followed it. The line was bugged. Someone was listening. Cassian stared at the alert, his face a mask of cold fury. He didn't hesitate. He tapped a single icon on his console, opening a secure channel to his entire network. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, but it carried the chilling finality of a death sentence. Activate the hush line, he commanded. Shut down the city. The address Lark gave me wasn't the Art Institute, a follow-up text. Terse and official-looking, had redirected me to a multi-level parking garage downtown. He'd cited protocol for a compromised witness. My fear was a frantic bird beating against my ribs, but the thought of Juno, of that candid, unaware photo, pushed me forward. I took the elevator to the 7th floor, the rooftop, stepping out into an exposed concrete landscape under a bruised, overcast sky, and my world stopped. Juno was there. She was tied to a thick concrete support pillar, silver duct tape over her mouth, her eyes wide with terror, standing a few feet away, admiring the view of the city with a detached air, was a man in a clear plastic raincoat over a sharp suit. He was smiling a vacant, empty smile. Agent Lark was nowhere to be seen. It was a trap. Of course, it was a trap. I had been so stupid. Lena Mirek, the man in the raincoat said, his voice smooth and unnervingly pleasant. Severin March, a pleasure. We were so worried you wouldn't come. He gestured vaguely toward Juno. The insurance policy. Now, the drive, if you please. My hand went to my pocket, but I didn't have it. I had left it at the orrery. The one smart thing I'd done all day, before I could speak. Another sound cut through the wind, whistling across the rooftop, the metallic scrape of a heavy door opening. From the stairwell, Cassian emerged. He was alone, his hands empty at his sides, his face a calm, unreadable mask. He took in the scene, me, Juno, the smiling man with a single sweeping glance. Severin March's smile widened. Cassian Vale, an unexpected bonus. It seems we've caught a bigger fish than we intended. Cassian ignored him. His eyes were on me, a question in their steel-gray depths. I gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of my head. I didn't have the drive. He understood. He then looked at March, his expression utterly devoid of fear or surprise. Let the girls go, he said, his voice quiet but carrying across the open space. They have nothing to do with this. To prove his point, he slowly raised his hands to shoulder height, palms open. I'm not here to fight. I'm here to negotiate. March let out a short, sharp laugh. Negotiate. You are in no position to negotiate. We have the girl. You have nothing. I have warehouse 47 inches, Cassian said, his voice as steady as a rock. Full of this season's electronics, untouched, yours, in exchange for Lena and her friend. March's laughter grew louder, echoing unnervingly in the concrete expanse. It was clear he wanted more than just a warehouse. He wanted to make a point. He wanted to humiliate the great Cassian Vale. You think this is about merchandise? This is about territory. This is about the new order of things. Just then, a faint, rhythmic sound drifted up from the street below, a car horn, beeping a steady, repeating pattern. It wasn't a sound of traffic or anger. It was a signal. Cashin's eyes flickered for a fraction of a second. It was all the warning I got. With a sudden, explosive movement, he lunged not at March, but at a large red lever on the wall marked "Emergency Brake." He yanked it down with all his force. A deafening clang reverberated through the structure as heavy steel security gates slammed down over every entrance and exit on the rooftop level. We were locked in. Or rather, they were. All hell broke loose. From the stairwell Cassian had used, 2 more of March's thugs appeared. From another, 2 of Cassian's silent, broad-shouldered sentinels emerged. But a third man burst out of the main elevator bay, and my heart leaped into my throat. It was Lark. He wasn't a ghost. He wasn't a traitor. His face was a mask of fury and betrayal as he took in the scene. He'd been used, led into the same trap I had. "Impact you! Drop your—" He started to yell, but March's men were already moving. It wasn't a gunfight. It was a brutal, close-quarters ballet of violence. Cassian moved with a deadly grace I couldn't have imagined, a whirlwind of precise strikes and blocks. He wasn't trying to kill. He was disabling, creating a barrier of motion around Juno. "Lena! The rope!" he shouted over the grunts and sickening thuds of fists hitting flesh. My paralysis broke. I scrambled forward, pulling the box cutter from my pocket, its small blade feeling laughably inadequate, while Cassian and his men, now aided by a roaring Agent Lark, engaged March's thugs. I sawed frantically at the thick ropes binding Juno's wrists. March, seeing his plan devolving into chaos, reached into his raincoat and threw something to the ground. It erupted in a thick, choking cloud of white smoke. The world dissolved into an opaque, blinding fog. I coughed, my eyes streaming. I couldn't see Juno. I couldn't see Cassian. Panic seized me again. Then a hand gripped my arm, strong and sure. "Stay with my left hand," Cassian's voice commanded, low and urgent in my ear. He didn't let go, pulling me through the disorienting white maze, his body a solid anchor in the chaos. We stumbled through a labyrinth of parked cars, the sounds of the fight muffled and distorted by the smoke. He led me to a heavy steel door I hadn't noticed before a fire escape. He kicked it open, and we plunged into a dizzying, clanging descent down a spiral staircase bolted to the side of the building. The sounds of pursuit echoed from above, heavy footsteps ringing on the metal treads. We didn't stop until we hit the street-level alley. Just as we burst out into the gray afternoon, a silver pickup truck, the kind used by construction crews, screeched to a halt beside us, its back tires smoking. One of Cassian's men was at the wheel. "Go!" Cassian yelled. Hoisting me effortlessly over the side and into the truck's bed, he vaulted in after me just as the first of March's men appeared in the alley mouth. The truck shot forward, throwing us against the cab. I looked back to see March's thugs piling into a black SUV, which roared out of the alley after us. A window rolled down, and the glint of a firearm appeared. The chase was on. We swerved through the downtown traffic, the pickup a nimble beast against the heavier SUV. The first shot rang out. Not a loud bang, but a sharp crack that was swallowed by the city's noise. It sparked off the asphalt a few feet behind us. We were flying down a wide street that ran parallel to the port, the skeletal arms of cranes visible against the sky. Up ahead, a massive container truck, emblazoned with the Halcyon clock logo, suddenly pulled out from a side street, blocking our path. It was a roadblock, a final, deadly pincer move. "Don't stop," Cassian roared at the driver. "Aim for the coupling." Instead of braking, our driver accelerated. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable. Catastrophic impact. There was a deafening screech of tortured metal, a violent shudder that shook the truck to its frame, but not the full-body collision I expected. I opened my eyes. Our driver had done as commanded, ramming the reinforced front bumper of the pickup directly into the articulated coupling that connected the truck's cab to its trailer. The container didn't flip, but the massive force knocked its rear wheels off kilter, causing the entire trailer to lurch sideways at an angle. It didn't stop us, but it created just enough of a gap, a sliver of an escape route between the tilted trailer and a row of parked cars. Our driver threaded the needle with inches to spare. The pursuing SUV wasn't so lucky. It tried to follow, but was too wide, slamming into the corner of the trailer with a sickening crunch of metal and glass. We didn't look back. The drive to the orrery was a blur. When we finally pulled into the building's hidden garage, Mireille was waiting, her face grim. She immediately took a terrified, sobbing Juno and led her toward a back room that I now realized was a fully equipped medical bay. Lark, bruised and exhausted, followed us in, looking around the impossible clockmaker's shop with a bewildered expression. "They were tracking my official comms," he said, his voice rough with anger and exhaustion. "I walked right into it. They used me to get to you." He looked at Cassian. "I have a file on Halcyon a foot thick. Every time we get close, a key piece of evidence disappears, or a warrant gets buried. Bix is running their own investigation, but it's riddled with leaks. We're fighting ghosts." Cassian walked over to a small bar and poured 3 glasses of water, his hands perfectly steady. He handed one to me, one to Lark. "Then we stop fighting ghosts," he said. "We give them bodies." He looked from Lark to me. "I propose an alliance, a dirty, clean alliance. My network has the reach, the eyes and ears on the street. We can get you inside their operation, provide you with the intelligence that isn't in your compromised files." He said, looking at Lark. "Provide the legal framework, the badges, the warrants, the official cover. We prioritize one thing, getting every last person out of Needle Cove." Lark stared at him, the career lawman weighing an offer from the city's most powerful shadow. It was a deal with the devil, but it was a devil who wanted the same thing he did. "On one condition," Lark said, his voice hard. "No assassinations, no bodies disappearing. When we get them by the book." Cassian nodded, his expression deadly serious. "I don't want them in a grave, Agent Lark," he said, his steel gray eyes meeting the agent's. "I want them in a courtroom. I want the entire city to see what they've done." I looked at Cassian, at the man who had just orchestrated a tactical escape from a rooftop death trap. For the first time, I saw him not as a crime lord, but as something else entirely. A king defending his territory, using his darkness to drag monsters into the light. The alliance was a fragile, ticking thing, much like the antique clocks that lined the walls of the orrery. Our first move was dictated by the USB drive. It pointed to a central hub, a place called the Frostline Transfer Station, an anonymous-looking logistics depot near the rail yards. It wasn't where the people or the cargo went. It was where the data was laundered, where digital shipping manifests were wiped clean and replaced with legitimate-looking paperwork. It was the brain of the Halcyon Clocks operation. To crack it open, Lark needed a multi-agency search warrant, a legal bomb that could blow the whole conspiracy wide open. Mireille, with the precision of a master watchmaker, drafted the document, a beautiful, terrifying piece of legal text citing interstate trafficking, money laundering, and human rights violations. Lark took it to a judge he trusted. And then we waited. The hours stretched into a day, then 2. Word came back through one of Lark's few trusted sources the warrant was stalled. It had been kicked up to something called the Port Commerce Integrity Commission, a bureaucratic black hole. One of Cassian's contacts confirmed our fears Halcyon had a man on the commission. Our legal bomb was being defused before it could even be armed. Frustration was a bitter taste in my mouth, but Cassian was a creature of strategy, not temper. If one door was locked, he would build another. "They think we're playing by their rules," he said one evening, standing before the holographic map in the center of the orrery. "So, we'll change the game." His solution was audacious. He announced an exclusive, invitation-only auction of rare antique timepieces to be held at the Vale Horological Restoration Shop. It was a perfect piece of theater. The city's wealthy and powerful, the kind of people who moved in the same circles as Halcyon's silent partners, were drawn to exclusivity and spectacle like moths to a flame. The orrery was outfitted with microscopic listening devices, its security cameras recalibrated to read lips, its network ready to intercept the digital chatter of the city's elite. It was a Venus flytrap, baited with luxury. My role was that of the featured artist. I was introduced as a prodigy in the dying art of enamel dial painting, a story that was surprisingly easy to sell. I spent the evening sketching custom designs on a tablet, my ears open, my eyes watching the reflections in the polished glass of the display cases. I listened to whispers of stock tips, political favors, and illicit affairs. And then I heard a name. It came from a conversation between two men admiring a Patek Philippe. They were talking about Severin March, laughing about his recent public failure at the parking garage. March is just a dog on a leash, one of them murmured, sipping his champagne. The real collector, the one with the taste for the unconventional, is Iris Quell. The name landed in the room with no fanfare, but in my mind, it was a thunderclap. Iris Quell, a mysterious, big-name art collector, famous for being anonymous. No one had ever seen her. She bought masterpieces through proxies, her name a ghost in the auction houses. Severin March wasn't the head of the snake, he was just the fangs. Later, after the last guest had departed, I found Cassian in the quiet of the main workshop. I was running a hand over the faint, silvery lines on the back of my own hand, old scars from stray needles when I used to help my mother with her sewing late at night. He came up behind me and gently took my hand, his thumb brushing over the marks. His touch was feather-light, but it sent a jolt straight through me. "My mother had scars like these," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "She used to say every stitch was a piece of a story." He looked from my hand to my eyes, his gaze intense. "We're going to cut this last dirty thread, Lena, for all of them." It felt like a vow, a promise that went deeper than our deal. The next afternoon, Lark arrived, his face a mixture of triumph and fury. He had the warrant, a junior judge, an idealist just out of law school, had signed it, but as Mireille read the document, her expression hardened. "He added a clause," she said, her voice tight with anger. "This warrant cannot be executed for 24 hours. It was a blatant, transparent move of interference, a 24-hour warning, enough time for Halcyon to wipe Frostline clean, to move their assets, to disappear. The victory turned to ash in our mouths. But Mireille Gage was not a woman who accepted defeat. Her eyes lit up with a cold, brilliant fire. "The criminal warrant is stalled," she said, pacing the room. "But they've given us an opening. They've assumed we'd only pursue the trafficking angle." She pulled up a different set of city ordinances on the main screen. Needle Cove is registered as a commercial garment factory. As such, it falls under the purview of the Private Worker Protection Bureau. I have a contact there who owes me a favor. We can get an immediate, no-notice inspection warrant based on an anonymous tip regarding unsafe labor conditions. We can't make arrests, and we can't seize evidence related to trafficking, but we can get every single worker out of that building tonight. It was genius, a perfect legal loophole. Cassian looked at me. "The workers will be terrified," he said. "They won't trust the police, but they might trust you. Can you handle intake? Get their names? Their stories?" I nodded, my heart pounding. This was it. This was why I was here. "I'll handle the perimeter," he continued. "My men will create a non-violent containment. No one gets in or out until Lark's people have secured the workers." That night, we moved. We approached Needle Cove not as a SWAT team, but as a small convoy of unassuming white vans, the kind used by city contractors. The factory was a grim, windowless block of a building in the industrial wasteland near the river. Lark, myself, and a small, hand-picked team of his most trusted MPACU officers, all wearing jackets with PWPB safety inspection printed on the back, walked up to the front door. The moment we were inside, the trap was sprung. A deafening clang echoed through the cavernous space as heavy iron shutters slammed down over the doors and loading bays, the main lights cut out, replaced by the terrifying pulse of red emergency strobes. We were locked in. The factory floor was a nightmare landscape of terrified faces, the air thick with the smell of fear and ozone. Dozens of men and women were frozen at their sewing machines. Guards armed with crude batons moved to block the aisles. In the chaos, I saw a young girl, no older than 16, huddled under her workstation, sobbing in terror. I pushed past a guard and knelt beside her. "Está bien," I said, my high school Spanish clumsy and halting. "Estamos aquí para ayudar." "It's okay. We are here to help." Her wide, dark eyes fixed on mine. I held out a hand. She hesitated, then grabbed it, her small hand clutching mine with desperate strength. A figure emerged onto a raised gantry overlooking the factory floor. "Severin March." He clapped his hands in mock applause. "A safety inspection. How wonderfully creative." From a side corridor, Cassian appeared, a heavy wrench in his hand. He had found another way in. He was alone, a single dark figure against the flashing red lights. He looked up at March. "Drop your weapon," he said, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the panicked sobs of the workers. March just laughed, a high, unhinged sound. He held up a small remote detonator. "Weapon," he sneered, and pressed the button. It wasn't a bomb. It was sound. A high-frequency sonic alarm shrieked through the building, a physical assault that vibrated in my bones. The glass in the foreman's office overlooking the floor shattered, raining down on the workers below. The panic intensified, turning the factory floor into a stampede of terrified people. March was using chaos as a weapon. Cassian didn't flinch. He moved with purpose, swinging the heavy wrench like a baseball bat, smashing the alarm's control panel on the wall into a shower of sparks. The piercing shriek died as quickly as it had begun. In the sudden, ringing silence, the main shutters began to grind upwards. Lark and his team, no longer needing their cover, swarmed in, efficiently subduing the guards and moving to protect the workers. They had a media contact on standby, and a single trusted news van was already pulling up outside, its camera light cutting a beam through the dusty air. For the first time, a light was being shown into the darkness of Needle Cove. I saw the image later, on every news channel, a sea of workers, wrapped in emergency blankets, sipping water, and me, my forehead smudged with dust, my arm around the shoulders of the Honduran girl, my eyes bright with a mixture of terror and fierce, defiant hope. In the confusion, March had slipped away. He disappeared into a service tunnel beneath the factory floor. One of Lark's men found a playing card, a Queen of Hearts, tucked into the tunnel's opening. Scrawled on the back was a message: "Quell will stitch your mouth shut with gold." From across the chaotic factory floor, my eyes met Cassian's. He was standing amidst the flashing lights of the emergency vehicles, a silent king in his reclaimed territory. He watched me as I helped the girl into the care of a paramedic. In his gaze, I saw it then a subtle shift, a quiet, profound decision being made. This, I realized, was a different kind of power, not the kind that ruled from the shadows with fear and whispers, but the kind that stood in the light, amidst the wreckage, and protected its people. His reign was changing, and somehow, I knew I was the reason why. The frantic, adrenaline-fueled pace of the past week evaporated, leaving a silence that was almost as unnerving. We were in a safe house, a sterile, high-end apartment in a glass tower called Harborview, overlooking the dark expanse of the Detroit River. The city lights were a galaxy of cold stars far below. After a brief, clinical checkup by a doctor on Cassian's payroll and a long, hot shower, I found him in the kitchen. He was not on the phone, not staring at a screen, not commanding his silent sentinels. He was dicing onions. The sharp, clean scent of them filled the air. He moved with the same precise, economical grace he used in a fight, his shoulders relaxed under a soft, dark sweater. He was making French onion soup, the aroma of simmering broth and thyme starting to fill the quiet apartment. "You cook," I stated, the observation sounding absurdly simple. He didn't look up, concentrating on sweeping the onions into the hot pan. "My grandmother taught me. She believed if you could make one perfect thing, you could survive anything. This was her one thing." I watched him stir, the tension slowly leaving my own shoulders. This was a side of him I couldn't reconcile with the man in the alley or the tactical commander on the rooftop. This was a man who had a grandmother who taught him to cook. "Cassian," I said, my voice quiet. He paused, spoon in hand, and finally looked at me. His steel gray eyes were softer in the warm kitchen light. "How much of it is real? How much of a mafia boss are you?" It was the question that had been lodged in my throat for days. He was silent for a long moment, turning back to the stove. "I am enough to never be hungry again," he said, his voice low. "I am enough to know that the rules the world gives you are designed to keep you in the place you were born. I am just enough," he added, looking over his shoulder, "to want to change the rules." "And me?" The question slipped out before I could stop it, small and raw with a fear I hadn't let myself acknowledge. What am I? The key, the bait. I'm afraid of being used, of being a tool that gets put back in the box when the job is done, or worse, just thrown away. He turned off the stove, the sudden silence heavy. He dried his hands on a clean towel, his movements deliberate. He walked over to me, stopping just a foot away. He reached into his pocket, not for a weapon or a phone, but for a single, heavy, intricately cut key on a simple leather loop. He pressed it into my palm. My fingers closed around the cold brass. "That is the master key to the orrery," he said. "It bypasses all the electronic locks. It's the only one of its kind. Murray doesn't even have it." He held my gaze, his own unwavering. "If I disappear, if I break my word, if you ever feel for 1 second that you are being used, you use this key, you go to the main console, and you execute the protocol I tagged with your mother's name, Alara. It will shut everything down, the network, the accounts, the locks, everything. It's the self-destruct for my entire operation. You have the right to shut me down." I stared at the key in my hand. It was the most terrifying and the most comforting object I had ever held. It wasn't just collateral. It was absolute trust, given by a man who trusted no one. It was his crown, and he was letting me hold it. Later, we sat on a deep, comfortable sofa, the bowls of soup long empty, the city lights twinkling below. The storm had passed, leaving a profound stillness. We didn't talk. We just sat, existing in the same quiet space. I was curled in the corner, and he was stretched out, his head resting on the opposite armrest. The silence felt shared, not empty. Slowly, I uncurled my legs and slid closer. He watched me, his expression unreadable. I stopped when my knee was just touching his thigh. I put my hand on his chest, feeling the steady, solid beat of his heart through his sweater. He covered my hand with his fingers lacing through mine. He pulled me gently, and I went, repositioning myself until I was lying alongside him, my head tucked into the curve of his shoulder. His arm was a warm, solid weight around my waist. We lay like that for a long time, just breathing. His hand moved, his fingers tracing the line of my jaw before he tilted my chin up. He kissed me, and it was different from our first kiss in the storm. It was unhurried, a slow, lingering exploration, a question and an answer in one. His lips were soft, warm. I kissed him back, a slow burn of response. My hand slid from his chest, up his neck, my fingers burying themselves in his thick, soft hair. His arm tightened, pulling me flush against him, and I could feel the heat of his skin seeping through the thin cotton of my shirt. We kissed for minutes, or maybe an hour, in slow, intermittent waves. We'd break, just to breathe, our foreheads touching, our breath mingling. His thumb stroked my hip, a quiet, possessive circle that felt more like a promise than a claim. I felt a tremor run through his hand, and I realized my own were shaking, too. We pulled back slightly, just enough to see each other's faces in the dim light, and for the first time, the shaking wasn't from fear or adrenaline or the cold. It was from trust, a terrifying, fragile, and overwhelming sense of safety. The spell was broken by the buzz of my phone on the coffee table. A text from Juno. My blood chilled, the warmth of the last hour instantly evaporating. "Hey, you okay? You got a weird package at the docklight. I didn't open it, but it's ticking. Don't be an idiot." A second text followed immediately. "Not a bomb, it's a clock, but it's still creepy." I showed the message to Cassian. His expression hardened, the brief domesticity vanishing, replaced by the cold strategist. He made one call. 20 minutes later, Mireille was at the apartment holding a small, velvet-wrapped box. She had rerouted her own people to intercept it. Inside was not a clock, but a single, antique watch face, enameled on its surface, in delicate, beautiful script, was my name. The hands were painted on, frozen at 11:11. Tucked beneath it was a small, embossed card. The countdown begins. "It's Quell," Mireille said, her voice clipped. "She's not a brawler like March. She's a basilisk. She won't come at you with a gun. She'll come at your reputation. The media narrative from Needle Cove is that you're a hero, a survivor. She's going to flip that. She'll paint you as a disgruntled, unstable artist who colluded with a known criminal. She nodded at Cassian to frame a legitimate businesswoman. She will make you the sacrifice. I can get you out of the city," Cassian said immediately, his voice low and urgent, "to Montreal. Tonight. You'll be safe there until this is over." I looked at the watch face in my hand, at my name painted so beautifully on it. I thought of the girl from the factory, the one who had gripped my hand like a lifeline. If I ran, I wasn't just running from Quell, I was running from her and all the other women like her. "No," I said, my voice surprising me with its firmness. "I'm not running. I won't be the reason those girls' stories get buried. I won't run away from them." Cassian studied my face for a long time. A slow, almost imperceptible pride dawned in his eyes, mingled with a deep, profound worry. He nodded once. "All right," he said softly. "Then we don't play defense. We hit her where she lives. We go straight for her heart." The plan formed quickly. Mireille's mind a tactical computer, the Civic Zenith Charity Art Gala. It was the biggest social event of the season, and it was Iris Quell's territory. She was the anonymous benefactor, the event's chair. "She's built her entire empire on the idea of being a ghost," Mireille explained. "We're going to give her a spotlight. We'll turn her favorite stage into a mirror, reflecting every crime she's ever committed." "It has to be clean," Cassian stated, looking at me. "The media will be there. The police, the whole city. No violence. Not a single shot fired. This will be a trial by public opinion." He placed a hand over his heart, a strange, formal gesture. "You have my word." I placed my hand on top of his, feeling the steady beat I now knew so well. "You have mine." The next 36 hours were a blur of preparation. We rehearsed our roles. I would be the guest of honor, the artist activist, there to tell the real story of Needle Cove. Cassian would be my surprise benefactor, a legitimate businessman who had been anonymously funding labor rights charities for years. Stepping into the light to support my cause, it was a perfect, plausible narrative. The night before the gala, I woke up from a nightmare. The image of the 11:11 clock face dripping blood seared into my brain. I sat up, gasping, my heart pounding. Cassian was there. He wasn't in bed, but sitting in a chair by the window, watching over the sleeping city, watching over me. He hadn't slept at all. He simply looked over, his presence a silent comfort, and stayed there until the first gray light of dawn broke over the river. The morning of the gala, he handed me a garment bag. Inside was not a glittering ball gown, but a simple, exquisitely tailored coat of moss green wool. It was the deep, rich color of the lake on a stormy day. "A talisman," he said, "for protection." We left the safe house, 2 soldiers dressing for a different kind of war. We were flanked by 2 of his men, but at a respectful distance. We were in the parking garage, walking toward his black Coupe, the same one I'd first ridden in. We were almost there when he pressed the unlock button on his key fob. The car's lights flashed, an answering beep echoing in the concrete space. "Stop!" The word wasn't spoken. It shrieked in my ear. Mireille's voice, electronically sharp and full of pure panic. She was our earpiece, our overwatch. The car's system just registered an unauthorized device wired to the ignition relay. "Don't touch it. It's a trap." Cassian reacted without thinking, his arm locked around my waist, and he threw us both backward, a violent, desperate heave that sent us sprawling onto the hard concrete floor. We landed in a painful heap just as a deafening explosion ripped through the garage. A fireball, bright orange and yellow, consumed the coupe, sending a shockwave of heat and shrapnel tearing through the air. The quiet was over. The storm had arrived. The explosion was a physical blow, a deafening roar that slammed me and Cassian against the concrete, the shockwave tearing the air from my lungs. Debris rained down as the garage's alarm system blared, a hysterical, wailing counterpoint to the ringing in my ears. We were alive, battered, bruised, and covered in dust, but alive. Mireille's voice in our earpieces had saved us. We didn't wait for the sprinklers. Cassian pulled me through a side door marked Utility, into a dark service tunnel. We ran, emerging blocks away into a city that had not yet registered the sound of its own corruption. By the time we made it back to the sanctuary of the orrery, the media was already in a frenzy. The car bomb was the lead story on every channel. It was being spun as a tragic, random act of violence. But Iris Quell, with the subtle precision of a master propagandist, was already ahead of us. Her spokesperson released a statement. "Miss, Quell is devastated by the news of the attack on Mr. Cassian Vave, a noted and private art collector, and Miss Lena Mirek, the community activist he was so generously supporting. She prays for their swift recovery and pledges to dedicate the proceeds from the upcoming Civic Zenith Gala to victims of violence in our city." She had named him Cassian V, not Vale, just enough to link him to the art world, to frame him as a fellow victim, and to sever any speculative ties to the halcyon clock. She was absorbing the attack into her own narrative, painting herself as the city's compassionate benefactor. Agent Lark stormed into the orrery an hour later, his face thunderous. "She's mocking us," he seethed, throwing his coat onto a chair. "She tried to murder you, Lena, and she's using it as a press opportunity. I still can't get that warrant for Frostline pushed through. The Integrity Commission has it buried under a mountain of red tape. The car bomb is evidence that's already compromised. I need something tangible. Cassian, I need something physical." Cassian was standing at the holographic table, his face a mask of cold calculation. The near-death experience hadn't shaken him. It had focused him into something sharper, harder. "She made a mistake," he said, his voice quiet. "She thinks she destroyed the evidence, but she just confirmed where to find the original copy." He brought up a new blueprint on the table. It wasn't a rail yard. It was the Civic Zenith building itself. "The gala is a distraction. The real prize is in the basement, sub-level 4. It's the largest, most secure private art logistics vault in the Midwest. It's where she moves her physical assets, where the dirty art is authenticated and swapped for clean pieces. It's not just a vault, Lark. It's her bank, her server, and her incinerator, all in one." The new plan was born from the ashes of the old one. We couldn't hit the vault directly. It was impregnable. So we would use her own party, her own stage, to tear her down. I called Juno, who was now permanently camped out in the orrery's tech bay, fueled by righteous anger and an endless supply of energy drinks. "Juno," I said, "I need to build an art exhibit, and I need it to be a Trojan horse." We called it Time Wounds. It was the perfect cover, art born from tragedy. It was a series of 5 large-scale interactive displays. To the glittering gala attendees, they would be abstract, moving pieces of art. But I knew what they really were. The first was a swirling, beautiful image of data points, which was actually a map of the illegal shipping routes. Another was a visualization of sound waves, which I had sourced from the recording of the sonic alarm at Needle Cove. They were portraits of a crime, hidden in plain sight. But the centerpiece, The real trap was a piece I called 1111 Reverse. "Here's the sting," Murray explained, her voice sharp and precise. "Quell operates through a fortress of proxies and digital cutouts. We need to tie her, personally and financially, to the halcyon clock. We are going to leak to the art blogs that 1111 Reverse is not just art, but a revolutionary NFT with an uncrackable authentication algorithm." "She's a collector," I added, picking up the thread. "She's obsessed with owning things no one else can have. She'll want to acquire it." "And when she does," Juno said, her fingers flying across a keyboard, "she'll use her primary, insulated digital wallet, the one she thinks is invisible. I'm building a public-facing payment portal for the auction. The second her wallet pings our server, the moment it authenticates the purchase, it will trigger a script I've hidden in the art's code. It won't just sell her the art, it will execute a trace, mapping her entire dark money network from her invisible wallet to every shell corporation she controls, and it will display it, live, on the main screen for the entire gala to see." While we built the trap, Cassian set the stage. He met with Professor Reese Alden, the one unimpeachable art expert in the city, a man whose integrity Quell had never been able to buy. Cassian laid out the evidence of Quell's financial empire, how she used fraudulent valuation algorithms to inflate the price of her art, laundering millions in the process. Alden, disgusted by the desecration of his life's work, agreed to be at the gala, ready to validate our findings and publicly dismantle Quell's reputation as a legitimate collector. The night of the gala arrived. The civic zenith was a cathedral of glass and steel, glittering with lights and echoing with the murmur of the city's most powerful and privileged. I walked in wearing the moss-green coat Cassian had given me, feeling like a lamb walking into a slaughterhouse. My hands were shaking. Cassian was at my side, magnificent in a black tuxedo. He looked less like a crime boss and more like a king. He leaned in, his lips brushing my ear. "Breathe, Lena," he whispered. "You are the only real thing in this room. Remember that." And then I saw her. Iris Quell. She was standing at the top of a grand staircase, a vision in a gown of spun gold. She was older than I expected, with regal silver hair and a serene, empty smile. On her hands, she wore long, pale golden gloves that reached her elbows, an affectation, or a way to avoid leaving fingerprints. She glided through the room, a shark in shimmering water. As the activist survivor, I was called to the stage to speak. My Time Wounds exhibit was displayed on massive screens behind me. I stepped up to the crystal lectern, my heart hammering against my ribs. Hundreds of faces, polished and curious, stared back at me. They call this the art of the city," I began, my voice a pathetic tremble. I gripped the sides of the lectern, my knuckles white. I closed my eyes for a second, and I wasn't in a gala hall. I was back in the factory, smelling the ozone. Hearing the sobs of the Honduran girl, I opened my eyes. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, clear anger. "I'm not an artist tonight," I said, my voice strong now, ringing with clarity. "I'm a witness, and I want to tell you about the art I saw a few weeks ago. It was the art of survival, performed by women trapped in a factory called Needle Cove. I want to tell you about the smell of burnt thread and hot metal." I looked directly at Iris Quell, who was watching me with that placid, terrifying smile. "I want to tell you about the sound of sewing machines that run 24 hours a day, a sound that drowns out the crying of the people chained to them." I spoke for 5 minutes. I told them everything. The room was so quiet I could hear the ice melting in the glasses. I had shattered their illusion. I had dragged the bloody, ugly truth into their beautiful, clean world. Off to the side, Cassian stood against a marble pillar, his arms crossed. He wasn't watching the crowd, he was watching me. His focus was absolute, a silent, tangible shield. He was my strength, but as he stood there, exposed and unmoving, I knew I was also his greatest weakness. I finished to a stunned, uncertain silence. The auction for 1111 Reverse began immediately. A program moved to reclaim the narrative. The bidding was fake, orchestrated by Morale's proxies, until finally, Iris Quell raised her paddle, a simple, elegant motion of her gloved hand. "Sold," the auctioneer cried, "to our generous host and benefactor, Miss Iris Quell." A spotlight followed her as she moved to the payment console on stage, a picture of philanthropic grace. She unclipped a small, glittering phone from her clutch and scanned her private QR code. For a beat, nothing happened. The screen behind her flickered, then, instead of the artwork, it was replaced by a sprawling, intricate spiderweb at its center, a glowing node, IQ, private vault. From it, hundreds of lines shot out, connecting to offshore accounts, shell corporations, and, at the very bottom, 3 nodes that were starkly, horribly familiar: Halcyon Clock Logistics, Needle Cove Textiles, and Frostline Transfer Station. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. It was her. It was all her. "Iris Quell," Agent Lark's voice boomed from the back of the hall. He and a dozen MPACU officers, dressed in tactical gear, began advancing through the crowd. "You are under arrest for human trafficking and—" Quell didn't even look at him. Her serene smile never wavered. She looked past him, to a technician in the sound booth at the back of the hall. It was Severin March, in a headset and uniform. Quell gave a single, sharp nod. And the world went black. The power was cut, total darkness. Chaos erupted, people screamed, tripping over chairs, the sound of breaking glass echoing through the hall. My heart seized. I was blind. "Lena!" Cassian's voice shouted. Somewhere to my left, I felt a sudden rush of air, a body lunging at me through the dark. I smelled the faint, chemical scent of plastic. March. He was here. I stumbled back, hitting the lectern. I heard the sharp, metallic shing of a blade being drawn. I didn't even have time to scream. A solid weight slammed into me. It was Cassian. His arms locked around me in a crushing embrace, and he used his body's momentum to spin us, putting his back to the unseen threat. I heard a choked, wet sound, a sickening thud, and Cassian's entire body went rigid. He let out a sharp, agonized breath, his grip tightening on me for a second before he slumped, his full weight pressing me against the lectern. Suddenly, the emergency light snapped on, bathing the room in an eerie, half-lit glow. At the same instant, every screen in the room, now on a backup generator, flashed to life. It wasn't the financial map. It was Morale's failsafe. It was the unedited, raw footage from the Needle Cove raid, the terrified faces, the flashing red lights, the sound of the girls' sobs, my own voice, shaky and desperate, speaking in Spanish. It was undeniable. Quell stood on the stage, bathed in the horrific glow of the videos, her golden gloves seeming to shine. She looked down at the payment console, then reached into her clutch and threw a handful of glittering gold dust over the machine. "You think justice is light," she hissed. "The terminal!" Juno's voice screamed in my earpiece. "That's quantum dot dust. It's a magnetic contaminant. She's corrupting the drive, destroying the evidence." Cassian pushed me behind him. He was standing, but his hand was pressed hard against his side, his fingers already slick and dark with blood. He was hurt, badly. He gripped the microphone on the lectern to steady himself. His voice, strained with pain but still powerful, echoed through the stunned hall. "Her name is Lena Mirek," he said, his eyes finding mine. "She's not a criminal. She's my witness, and she is this city's witness." "Arrest her!" Lark roared. His team finally rushing the stage. March, now near the main exit, fired a single shot from a handgun, not at a person but straight up into the massive crystal chandelier. It exploded, raining a lethal shower of glass and metal onto the crowd below. The panic became a stampede. In the chaos, Quell, shielded by March, slipped through a side exit and was gone. The world outside was a symphony of sirens and screams, but in the small, dusty backstage dressing room, the only sound was Cassian's ragged breathing. He stumbled through the door, one of his men supporting him, his hand clamped to his side, the perfect black fabric of his tuxedo jacket already dark and wet with blood. He slumped into a velvet chair under a single, bare bulb, his face pale and slick with sweat. The guard moved to help, but I pushed him aside. "Get a med kit, now," I ordered, my voice a stranger's. Sharp and devoid of the panic that was clawing at my insides, my focus narrowed to a single point, the dark stain spreading across his white shirt. I knelt in front of him, my gala dress pooling on the dirty floor. "Let me see." He tried to shake his head, a grimace of pain tightening his features. "It's nothing." "It is not nothing," I snapped, my hands surprisingly steady as I began unbuttoning his shirt. "Cassian, look at me." His eyes, clouded with pain, finally met mine. They were still steel, but a fire was banking low within them. "Don't let them take your voice, Lena," he rasped, his breath catching. He reached up, his hand surprisingly strong, and gripped my wrist, pulling my hand away from his wound. He pressed his forehead to mine, his skin clammy. "What you did out there, that was the truth. Don't let them silence it." "I won't," I whispered, my own forehead pressed against his. "And you won't bleed out in a dressing room. Now let me help you." The guard returned with a heavy-duty medical kit, and I went to work. The wound was a deep, vicious slice along his ribs, bleeding profusely. March's blade had been sharp. I pressed a thick gauze pad against the cut, applying firm, steady pressure. He hissed in pain but didn't pull away. The world shrank to this single, desperate act of preservation. My hands, which hours ago had been sketching, were now holding this man together. His personal doctor arrived minutes later, a grim-faced man who worked with the silent efficiency of someone accustomed to patching up bullet holes and knife wounds. While he cleaned and stitched the wound with practiced speed, Cassian's eyes never left my face. After the doctor had applied a tight, clean bandage, he gave Cassian a stern look. "You need a hospital." "No hospitals," Cassian said, his voice a low growl. The doctor just shook his head and packed his bag, knowing it was an argument he wouldn't win. He left us alone in the quiet room, under the warm, yellow light of the single bulb. Cassian's shirt was open, the stark white bandage a brutal contrast against the tanned skin of his chest and abdomen. I reached out, my fingers trembling slightly, and laid my hand flat on his chest, just beside the bandage. His skin was warm, alive. I could feel the powerful, steady thump of his heart beneath my palm. His own hand came up to cover mine, his fingers lacing through my own. He pulled me closer, and I went, kneeling between his legs, my body fitting into the space he made for me. He was still in the chair, and I was on the floor. But in that moment, we were equals. Two soldiers in a trench. He lowered his head and I lifted mine, and our lips met. It was a kiss of raw, desperate affirmation. It was long and slow, punctuated by our ragged breaths. It wasn't about passion. It was about life, about the visceral, overwhelming relief of it. I tasted his pain and his strength, and I hoped he could taste my resolve. His free hand rested on my waist, his grip firm and grounding, a silent anchor. He was the one who was wounded, but he was still holding me steady. "I'm here," he whispered against my lips, his voice rough. "Together." I breathed back, the word a solemn vow. We held the kiss, a moment of pure, undiluted connection, a promise sealed in the quiet aftermath of violence. We stopped there, at the precipice, respecting the line. The unspoken desire was not for a moment of pleasure, but for a future, a tomorrow. That was the promise. The door burst open, and Mireille swept in, her face a mask of controlled urgency. "We have a problem. Quell used the chaos to get out through the freight corridor. March went a different way, along the riverfront service path. They split up." Cassian was already pushing himself to his feet, a low groan escaping his lips. "She won't get far." "You're not going anywhere," I said, standing up to block his path. "You can barely stand." "She won't stop, Lena," he said, his eyes blazing with a cold fire. "She will burn down this entire city to get to you. I have to end this tonight." He was right. I knew he was. But the thought of him going out there, wounded and vulnerable, was a physical pain in my chest. I looked at the white bandage, a clear target under his torn shirt. Then I looked down at my own moss green coat, discarded on a nearby chair. An idea, desperate and symbolic, took hold. I grabbed the coat and held it out to him. "Then wear this." He looked at me, confused. "Lena..." "Wear it," I insisted, my voice firm. "It will hide the bandage, and you gave it to me for protection. Now it's my turn." A flicker of understanding, of something deep and profound, passed through his eyes. He nodded slowly and shrugged out of his ruined tuxedo jacket, letting me help him slide his arms into the soft wool of my coat. It fit him surprisingly well across the shoulders. He was no longer a crime lord in a tuxedo. He was a wounded man, wrapped in my protection. We caught up to March on the Millwright Bridge, a skeletal iron structure that spanned the dark, churning river. The wind was a physical force, howling through the girders, whipping my hair across my face. March was halfway across, a wild, cornered animal. He fired a handgun blindly behind him, the shots pinging off the steel framework, not aiming at us but at the traffic, forcing cars to swerve and creating a wall of chaos between him and the police cars that were closing in from the other side. Agent Lark's voice boomed from a patrol car's loudspeaker. "It's over. Severin, drop your weapon. The evidence is secure." March let out a high, hysterical laugh that was snatched away by the wind. He held up a small device with a blinking red light. "The evidence," he shrieked. "This whole bridge is evidence." He held it over the railing, showing the wires that snaked down into the darkness, connected to a charge on the bridge's main support. "One press, and we all go down together." His hand was shaking violently. Not from the cold or fear, but from something else. The desperate, erratic tremors of an addict in need of a fix. This wasn't a calculated move. This was a tantrum. Before Cassian or Lark could react, I stepped forward, my hands raised. "Lena, no." Cassian grabbed for my arm, but I shook him off. "Severin!" I shouted, my voice surprisingly strong against the wind. "Look at me. Think of the women at Needle Cove. Think of their faces." I started reciting the simple prayer the Honduran girl had taught me, my Spanish clumsy but heartfelt. For a split second, I saw something flicker in March's wild eyes. Not reason, not surrender, but a shard of shared humanity, a memory of the people he had helped to victimize. It was the only opening Cassian needed. In a single, fluid motion, he drew a small, weighted knife from an ankle sheath I never knew he had and threw it. It wasn't aimed at March, but at the wires connecting the detonator to his hand. The blade spun through the air, severing the thin cables just as Lark, seizing the same moment of distraction, fired a single, precise shot. The bullet hit March in the shoulder. He cried out, a sound of shock and pain, and the now useless detonator tumbled from his nerveless fingers, splashing into the dark river below. He collapsed to his knees, clutching his shoulder, defeated. And then, as Lark's team moved in to arrest March, she appeared, Iris Quell. She stepped out from behind the bridge's main tower, flanked by two large, expressionless bodyguards. She wasn't running. She was holding up her phone, the screen glowing. She was live streaming. "As you can see," she said, her voice calm and smooth, a newscaster reporting from a war zone, "the criminal Cassian Vale, a man who has held our city in his grip for years, has orchestrated this entire evening's violence. He uses charity as a front to launder his reputation. But as you can see, his true nature is always revealed." Cassian stepped forward, my green coat flapping in the wind around him. He didn't deny it. He faced her, and the thousands of people watching on their phones. "I have made mistakes," he said, his voice clear and strong. "I have operated in the shadows. But tonight, you, Iris Quell, are being arrested for your crimes against the weakest people in this city." As if on cue, a new flood of information hit the web. It was Morel's final move. She released a torrent of authenticated documents, the fake financial records Quell had submitted to the charity, proving massive tax evasion, and the unredacted shipping manifests from a dozen other factories like Needle Cove. The live comments on Quell's feed, which had been full of shock and confusion, began to turn. The tide of public opinion, the only court she cared about, was turning against her. Her serene mask finally cracked. A snarl of pure hatred twisted her features. "Shoot them!" she hissed to her guards. One of the men raised a gun. It all happened in a flash. Cassian grabbed me, spinning me around and shielding me with his body, pressing me hard against the cold iron of the bridge's railing. A shot rang out, loud and sharp. I felt a tug on the coat, a violent pluck near my shoulder, and heard the whine of a ricochet. He had taken the hit for me, again. But this time, the thick wool of the coat, my coat had been just enough. The bullet had grazed the fabric and deflected off the steel behind us. "Sniper team, take the shot," Lark yelled into his radio. But Quell was already moving. As her guards provided covering fire, she slipped through a maintenance gate and down a ladder to a sleek black speedboat that had been waiting in the bridge's shadow. The engine roared to life, and she sped off into the darkness, a ghost disappearing back into the night. March was in custody, but the Queen was still free. The knot wasn't untied. It had only been pulled tighter. The boat's engine was a fading heartbeat in the darkness. "She's heading for Iron Shoals." Agent Lark's voice crackled over the tactical radio in the armored SUV we were now speeding in. The city was a wet, neon smear outside the window. We had March in custody, but it felt like capturing a pawn while the Queen was still on the board. "Iron Shoals," Cassian repeated. His voice was strained. He sat beside me, leaning forward, his hand pressed hard against his side, my moss-green coat pulled tight around him as if to hold himself together. "She's going for the hard copy, the master ledger." "How do we find her in that maze?" Lark demanded. "That place is miles of stacked containers." My mind flashed back to the gala, to the chaos, to Quell's final act of defiance. "The dust," I said, the words clicking into place. "At the gala, when she threw that gold powder on the payment console. She wasn't just destroying the evidence, she was tagging it." Morel's voice, cool and immediate, cut into our earpieces. She must have been monitoring all our comms. "I've already analyzed the residue from the console photos. Lena, you're brilliant. It wasn't just gold. It's a high-end art restoration pigment, potassium argentate. It's infused with isotopic markers, designed to be tracked under specialized UV light. It's how authenticators fingerprint a priceless masterpiece." "She's arrogant," I breathed, understanding dawning. She was tagging the console so she could retrieve it later, thinking we were all fools. She must have it on her. "She's a beacon," Cassian said, his voice tight with pain. "Drive faster." The Iron Shoals container bay was a graveyard of steel giants. Looming in the pre-dawn mist, Lark's MPACU team and a heavily armed BIX unit, the federal agency that had been compromised, had formed a silent perimeter, their flashing lights painting the fog in strokes of red and blue. "We've tracked her boat to this pier," Lark said, his voice low, handing me a heavy, backpack-sized UV illuminator. "Bay 13. It's registered to one of her shell companies as Environmental Art Storage. Climate-controlled." "It's a biolab," Cassian corrected, climbing stiffly out of the truck, the green coat a stark splash of color in the gloom. "A cryogenic storage facility, the perfect place to hide a server, black box off the grid, secure, temperature-stable, and power-redundant." The main entrance to Bay 13 was a slab of reinforced steel. "Her personal guards are already inside. The system's locked down," Lark said. "We can't breach it without a tactical demo, and that could take an hour. She'll be long gone." "We're not using the door," Cassian said. He was pale, but his eyes were sharp. He led us away from the tactical team, toward an overgrown drainage culvert half hidden by weeds. "The city built these tunnels during Prohibition. They run under the entire port." He stopped at the entrance, the smell of rust and stagnant water breathing out of the darkness. He looked at me, a flicker of something raw in his gaze. I got lost down here when I was 12. Stayed in the dark for 3 days. It's the last time I ever let myself be weak. He held out his hand to me, a silent question. I know the way now. I took his hand. It was cold, but his grip was strong. We descended into the past, into the dripping, suffocating darkness. I held the heavy UV lamp, sweeping its invisible beam across the damp concrete walls. Nothing. Then a tiny, brilliant fleck of gold glittered on the wall, bright as a star. Then another, a few feet down. She'd come this way. She was leaving a trail, completely unaware that her own arrogance was leading us right to her. We followed the glittering path through the maze of tunnels, Cassian moving with a pained but certain gait, his vulnerability. His admission of being a lost boy in this very spot was a more profound intimacy than any kiss. He was trusting me with his past while he led us to our future. The trail ended at a rusted ladder. We climbed, emerging into a sterile white service corridor. The air was frigid, the hum of massive cooling units vibrating through the floor. We were inside. We found the vault. It was a massive circular room with a heavy, insulated door, like the entrance to a bank's treasury. Through the reinforced porthole window, we saw her Iris Quell. She had shed her golden gala gown for a practical black thermal suit. She stood in the center of the mist-filled room, in front of a large, abstract sculpture wrapped in protective foil. She was holding a can of accelerant and a flare gun. The sculpture wasn't just art. It was the housing for the server, the master ledger, the black box that held all her secrets. She was going to burn the entire vault, to incinerate the evidence once and for all. "Murray," Cassian whispered into his lapel mic, his breath pluming in the cold. "Fire suppression, Bay 13, now." "On it," Murray's voice came back instantly. Inside the vault, Quell raised the flare gun, but before she could pull the trigger, a deafening hiss filled the air. Jets of white CO2 gas blasted from nozzles in the ceiling. The chemical flame of the flare sputtered, choked, and died, extinguished by the sudden lack of oxygen. The fire was stopped. But the room was now filling with suffocating gas. We watched through the porthole as Quell staggered, clutching her throat. "We have to go in," Cassian said. He was already coughing, the strain and the cold air aggravating his injury. "We can't. The air." I gasped, my own lungs burning. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed a heavy wool blanket from a nearby emergency station, plunged it into a safety water barrel, and wrapped the soaking, heavy cloth around my head, covering my mouth and nose. "Breathe through this," he commanded. He didn't save a piece for himself. He slammed his body weight against the emergency door release. The heavy door hissed open, and he pulled me inside, into the freezing, oxygen-starved fog. Quell stared at us, her face a mask of disbelief and pure, unadulterated hatred. "It's over, Quell." Cassian breathed, each word visibly costing him. He was leaning heavily against the door frame, my green coat the only thing holding him upright. She laughed, a dry, choked sound that turned into a cough. She pulled a long, wicked-looking blade from her belt, a professional art frame cutter, its edge like a razor. "Over," she rasped, advancing on us, her eyes full of venom fixed on me. You're just a puppet. Lena, a stupid, sentimental puppet with a heart." I stepped away from Cassian's side, planting myself between Quell and the foil-wrapped server. The wet wool was heavy on my head, but my voice was clear. A heart is the one thing you could never afford to buy. Iris. "Then I'll cut it out." She shrieked and lunged. "Now, Murray," Cassian roared. With a sound like a giant sigh, a series of heavy steel shutters slammed down. One sealed the main door we just entered. 2 others sealed the antechamber behind Quell, where her 2 bodyguards were frantically trying to break in. It was Cassian's trap, sprung by Murray on a reverse 11:11 timer. Her guards were locked out. We were locked in. A heavy thud came from the main door. "Cassian, Lena?" It was Lark's voice, muffled and distant. "We're here. Bix has the perimeter. It's over. Open the door." "We're locked in," I yelled back. Quell, seeing her escape routes cut off, screamed in primal rage. She ignored us, diving for the black box, using her knife to cut it free from its base. She was going to destroy it manually. Cassian moved to intercept her. He launched himself from the wall, tackling her low, but his wounded side couldn't take the impact. He cried out, a sharp, terrible sound, and his legs gave out. He slipped on the icy floor, but his desperate lunge had been enough. The black box server, dislodged from its base, slid across the smooth floor like a curling stone, stopping right at my feet. Quell scrambled up, her knife raised. She was coming for me. I didn't think. I grabbed the heavy, cold box. The main door was sealed, but I remembered the sample pass-through, a small, slot-like opening. "Lark!" I screamed, running to the door and shoving the box through the slot. Take it now." A dozen gloved hands grabbed it from the other side, pulling it to safety. I turned back to Quell. She had frozen, her hand outstretched, her knife clattering to the floor. Her face, for the first time, was a mask of total, absolute defeat. "You lose." I breathed, the words fogging in the freezing air. She let out a sound that was not human, a wail of loss and fury. She lunged, not at me, but at the door controls, clawing at the panel. "Mireille, the cryo-purge," Cassian commanded from the floor, his voice a weak rasp. "Cassian, the systems are unstable." Mireille's voice pleaded in my ear. "It's not rated for... do it." A new hiss filled the room, this one far more terrifying. It wasn't gas. It was a visible, rolling fog of liquid nitrogen, the facility's core coolant, being vented directly into the vault. The temperature plummeted from freezing to something Arctic in seconds. Frost bloomed on the walls, spreading like white fire. Quell, in her tracks, slowed. Her movements became sluggish, her thermal suit stiffening. She looked down at her pale golden gloves as they frosted over, turning white and brittle. She was frozen in place, a statue of her own arrogance. With a groan of hydraulics, the main door finally rolled open. The frigid fog spilled out into the corridor, revealing the armed Bix and MPACU agents. They flooded in, their weapons raised, swarming past me to cuff the frozen, sputtering, and utterly broken Iris Quell, outside the bay doors, which were now open. I could hear the distant sound of a crowd. Lark's team must have kept their live stream running, as an agent carried the sealed, frosted black box out into the flashing red and blue lights. A cheer erupted. The adrenaline fled my body all at once, leaving me weak-kneed. I turned, my lungs aching, and searched the fog. I found him. Cassian was on one knee. My moss-green coat pooled around him. His head was bowed. His hand was pressed to his side, and this time, the blood flowing between his fingers was bright red and terrifyingly new. His wound had fully torn open. I ran to him, dropping to my knees on the icy floor, grabbing his shoulders. "Cassian," he looked up, his face ashen, but his eyes were clear. He was looking at me, really seeing me. "It's over," I whispered, my voice breaking, tears finally freezing on my cheeks. "We did it. It's really over." He managed a small, exhausted smile. He raised his hand, his fingers cold against my skin, and brushed a tear from my cheek. "No, Lena," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's the beginning. 3 months. In 3 months, the seasons began to turn, and so did the wheels of justice. The trial of Iris Quell and her associates was the only story that mattered in Detroit. I sat in the public gallery every day, a silent observer. I watched as the data from the black box server, my digital artwork from the USB drive displayed on massive screens beside it, drew an undeniable, irrefutable map of Quell's empire of suffering. One by one, the women of Needle Cove, their faces no longer shadowed by fear but filled with a quiet, fierce dignity, took the stand. They were given protected status, new lives, a future. They were the heroines of this story. The day Cassian took the stand, the courtroom was so quiet you could hear the city breathing outside. He wore no armor, no expensive watch, just a simple, perfectly tailored charcoal suit. He wasn't a king in his castle. He was a man facing the light. He spoke as a cooperating witness. He didn't make excuses or ask for pity. He calmly, factually, admitted to a career spent in the gray spaces of the law. He laid his own, smaller kingdom at the feet of the court, but he drew a razor-sharp line between his world and Quell's. "My business was about leverage," he said, his voice steady. "Hers was about subjugation. My currency was information. Hers was human souls." In exchange for his testimony, which was the final nail in Quell's legal coffin, he agreed to a complete restructuring of his assets under federal oversight. The Vale Empire was dissolved. In its place, a new entity was born, the Vale Mirek Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to funding legal aid and vocational training for exploited laborers. My name. He had put my name beside his, not in a whisper, but in a court of law, a permanent public record of our alliance. Bix and MPACU, in a rare joint press conference, officially announced the success of Operation TikTok, a name Juno had cheekily supplied, and it had stuck. The Halcyon clock was dismantled, its network shattered. Severin March, his addiction laid bare during the trial, received a heavy sentence, trading his testimony for a chance at rehabilitation. And Iris Quell, stripped of her art, her reputation, and her freedom, received a sentence of such historic length that she would never see the outside of a federal prison again. My own new beginning smelled of fresh paint, hot coffee, and clean linen. I opened a small shop in a renovated Ferry Row storefront, not far from my old apartment. The sign I painted myself read, "Needle and North Restoration and Design." It was a hybrid, a place of healing. Half of it was my tattoo studio. The other half was a bright, airy workshop with a row of new sewing machines, where I taught the survivors of Needle Cove the craft my mother had taught me, not as a means of survival, but as an art form. The first mural I painted on the exposed brick wall was of a clock face. Its hands were set to 11:12. 1 minute past survival. Cassian returned to the orrery. He spent weeks methodically, dispassionately, dismantling the illegal machinery of his former life, the listening devices, the ghost servers, the untraceable accounts. All of it was wiped, turned over to federal agents, or simply destroyed. He kept the antique clocks. He said they were a reminder of time that could be lost and time that could be reclaimed. One cool autumn night, he took me to a small, quiet park on the edge of Lake St. Clair. The air was crisp, smelling of damp earth and distant wood smoke. I wore the moss-green coat, its familiar weight a comfort. We sat on a weathered wooden bench, and I leaned back against his chest, his arms wrapping around me, his hands lacing through mine. We watched the last light fade from the sky, the water turning from slate gray to deep indigo. "There's a house," he said softly, his voice a low rumble against my back. "A small place, a few miles up the coast. It's called Dune Hollow. You can see the freighters passing from the front porch." He paused. "It has a yard big enough for a dog." I smiled, a real, unburdened smile, and leaned my head back against his shoulder. A dog, a house, a future. These were things I had never allowed myself to dream of. He reached into the pocket of the coat, my coat, and pulled something out. It was a simple, unadorned clock face, its hands missing. The face was blank, a clean slate of polished brass. "You choose the time," he said. I took it from him. The metal was cool against my skin. With my thumb, I imagined moving the non-existent hands. I didn't set them to a time of day. I turned them to the very top, midnight, 0000, the start of a new day, a brand new time. As if on cue, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, a text from Murray. His arm tightened around me as he read it. He turned the phone so I could see the screen. 3 words, "Quell, guilty, all counts." We didn't cheer. We didn't celebrate. We just held each other, a silent, profound gratitude passing between us. We had won. The past was finally over. A few weeks later, Agent Lark came into the shop, and he looked different. The weight of the long investigation lifted from his shoulders. He rolled up his sleeve and pointed to a bare spot on his forearm. "I need something," he said, his voice gruff. "A reminder." I spent an hour tattooing him, a small, intricate design of a single clock gear, and beneath it, one word, witness. A reminder of a time when the darkness was forced to look at the light. Juno was a permanent fixture at Needle and North, her playlists filling the space with life. One afternoon, she cranked up the music and we all just laughed, a sound of pure, uncomplicated joy. The girls from the factory were there, trying on the first batch of winter coats they had designed and sewn themselves. The stitches were straight and strong. So were their futures. That evening, Cassian found me locking up the shop, and he didn't say anything. He just held out his hand. In his palm was another key. It wasn't the ornate, heavy key to the orrery. This one was small, simple, modern. "Dune Hollow," he said. It wasn't a question. He placed the key in my hand and closed my fingers around it. "Stay," he said, his voice soft, his steel gray eyes searching mine. "If it's what you want." I looked from the key in my hand to the face of the man who had walked through fire with me. And for me, the boy from Rivergate, who had survived. The king who had abdicated his throne, the man who was offering me not a kingdom, but a home. "I choose you," I said, my voice thick with an emotion that was bigger than gratitude, stronger than love, and our people. He pulled me into his arms, and he kissed me, there on the rain-dampened sidewalk under the warm glow of my shop sign. The kiss was slow, deep, and complete, a promise of quiet dawns and peaceful nights. He rested his forehead against mine, and I could feel his heart beating, steady and in time with my own, as the city we had fought for breathed around us. Later, he told me he had hung one last clock in the orrery, a new one, of his own design, on the back, where no one else would ever see it. He had engraved a single line. "When the darkness looked back, the first blink was love." Thank you so much for listening to our story. We'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let's share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to our channel, Mafia Boss Stories. Give this video a like and show your support by hitting that hype button to help this story reach more listeners.